All right, let's get one thing straight. Being kind is not the same as being a pushover. We've all been there, helping out, saying yes to everything, forcing a smile even when we're frustrated, only to end the day completely drained. Sound familiar? Well, today we're flipping the script. I'm going to show you how to be the nicest person in the room without letting anyone walk all over you. Yes, we're going to keep it real, honest, and maybe a little controversial. Ready for a change? Let's get into it. First off, don't smile if you don't feel like it. This might stir up some debate, but stop forcing a smile when you're not in the mood. I know many of you might think, but smiling is polite. It makes others feel comfortable. Sure, but let's be real for a second. How many times have you put on a fake smile just to make someone else feel at ease, even when you were exhausted, stressed, or irritated on the inside? We've been taught, especially women, that smiling makes us more approachable, that it's part of being kind. But guess what? Smiling when you don't want to is exhausting. It's like wearing a mask that says everything's fine, when deep down, it's not. One time I went to a party where everyone was chatting and having fun, but I was completely drained. You know when you've hit your social limit? Instead of excusing myself or just keeping a neutral expression, I kept smiling like I was in customer service mode. And guess what? No one noticed I wasn't okay. Why? Because my face was saying everything was great. Inside, I was screaming for help, but at least I looked nice, right? The lesson here is, forcing a smile when you don't want to isn't just annoying, it's dishonest, not just to others, but to yourself. By pretending everything's fine, you're saying your feelings matter less than someone else's comfort. And I'm here to tell you, you don't owe that to anyone. If you're not okay, don't fake it. The people who really care will appreciate your honesty more than a fake smile. Now here's the catch. Not everyone will like this. Some people might think you're being rude or distant for not smiling all the time. But guess what? That's their problem, not yours. We're allowed to feel a range of emotions. We're not cartoon characters. And look, I'm not saying to walk around with a frown. If you're genuinely happy, smile away. But when you're not, just relax. Trust me, it's freeing. And guess what? You'll still be a kind person, just an honest one. At the end of the day, the world doesn't need more fake smiles. It needs authenticity, real joy, and space to feel what you're going through. Forcing a smile isn't a sign of kindness. It's a sign of repression, and the first person you owe respect and kindness to is yourself. Now, about respecting yourself as much as you respect others. This seems obvious, but think about it. When was the last time you really put yourself first? We're always bending over backward to please others, making everyone happy. But what about us? Do we settle for the leftovers? Here's a truth that might feel a bit uncomfortable. Putting yourself first isn't selfish. Yes, I said it. And before anyone says we should be selfless, remember that selflessness is only healthy when it doesn't become self-neglect. I used to think being kind meant putting everyone else first, always saying no problem, while I was burning out inside. But that's not being nice. That's being a people pleaser. Let me tell you a personal story. I had a friend who constantly asked for favors, rides, help with moving, advice at all hours. And I always said yes because that's what a good friend does, right? But every time I said yes to him, I was saying no to myself. I was sacrificing my time, my energy, and sometimes even my own plans, all to be the nice one. And the worst part? I didn't respect myself enough to realize I was being taken advantage of. It wasn't until I hit my breaking point that I realized I was giving others more respect than I was giving myself. It made me reflect. I would never treat someone else the way I was treating myself. Now here comes the hard part. You're not responsible for everyone else's happiness. If you give too much of yourself and put yourself last, that's not kindness. That's self-disrespect. And when you start valuing yourself, some people won't like it. They'll say you've become selfish, that you've changed. And guess what? They're right. You've changed for the better. I'm not saying to go around being rude, but you have the right to set boundaries. Just like you wouldn't allow someone else to be overwhelmed. Don't do it to yourself. Respect is a two-way street, and you're part of that equation. When you start respecting yourself, people learn how to treat you based on what you tolerate. If you're always overgiving and not respecting yourself, that's what others will expect from you. But when you set boundaries and prioritize your well-being, you attract people who respect those boundaries, and those who don't, well, they can leave, and that's perfectly fine. True respect is mutual. It's not about being nice at the expense of yourself, but about balancing kindness with self-respect. And that's something worth fighting for. At the end of the day, you deserve love, care, and respect just as much as anyone else. You can't give what you don't have, so start by taking care of yourself. The more you respect yourself, the more your kindness will come from a place of balance, not exhaustion. Lastly, be generous, but not at the cost of your peace of mind. Let's talk about generosity for a second. Since we were kids, we've heard that being generous is one of the best qualities, right? But here's a bit of a hard truth. You can be generous and still seriously harm your mental health. Yep, generosity can actually drain your peace if you're not careful. So let me be straight with you. Be generous, but never let it drive you crazy. Because when you reach your breaking point, no one's going to thank you for it. And believe me, I learned this the hard way. I'm all for helping people. I truly believe the world needs more kindness. But here's where things get tricky. When you're the person everyone comes to, always available, offering your time, energy, and even your resources, what's left for you? In the end, you'll feel overwhelmed, wondering why you're so exhausted all the time. Sound familiar? Let me tell you, that's not generosity. It's self-sabotage disguised as kindness. I used to be that person, you know? The one who always said yes to every request, every invitation, every charity event. Need someone to help you move? I was there. Want me to bake for the school fundraiser even though I can't cook? Sure, why not? But what happened was that I was giving so much of myself that, eventually, I had nothing left to give. I'd say yes to one thing, and then someone else would ask for something else, and I'd agree to that too. Before I knew it, I was on autopilot, running on empty, and worst of all, I no longer enjoyed helping out. Here's the thing. No one was forcing me to be so generous. I was doing it because I thought, if I don't, who will? Or worse, I thought, if I say no, they'll think I'm selfish. But the truth is, people will take as much from you as you're willing to give. And that doesn't make them bad people. It just means you need to learn how to set your own boundaries. Because if you don't, they won't do it for you. Here's the translation of the text into English. With some adjustments for more commonly used phrases, you have the right to say no, even if it's for a noble cause. You don't owe the world every bit of your energy. If saying yes to someone means saying no to your own peace, your time, or your well-being, guess what? You've crossed the line from generosity to self-sacrifice, and that's not good for anyone, not even the person you're trying to help. And let's talk about the guilt that comes with it, right? Oh, I should help because I'm a good person. Or if I don't, people will think I'm rude. The reality is that you can be generous and still set boundaries. In fact, true generosity only happens with limits. Without them, you're not giving from the heart. You're giving because you feel obligated, and that's not the same. Want to know how I solved this? I started prioritizing my own peace. I made a simple rule. Before saying yes to anything, I ask myself, can I do this without burning out? If the answer is no, I politely decline. And the first few times I said no, I felt like I was letting people down. But you know what? No one was shocked. The world kept turning, people found other solutions, and I didn't end up in a corner crying from exhaustion. Here's the important message. Generosity without limits doesn't last. If you keep giving and giving without ever recharging, you're going to hit a wall. And when that happens, it's not just you who suffers. Your ability to be generous does too. You can't help others if you're not taking care of yourself. The people who truly care about you don't want you to sacrifice your mental health for them. And if someone expects that of you, well, maybe they need to rethink what they consider generosity. Being generous should feel good. It should come from a place of abundance, not exhaustion. When you give from a balanced state, you can help in a genuine, caring, and healthy way. But when you give until there's nothing left, that's not generosity. That's self-destruction. And no one, I repeat, no one deserves that. True generosity starts with you. It begins by understanding and respecting your own limits. It's knowing that helping others shouldn't come at the cost of your well-being. You can be the kindest person in the world and still say no. In fact, sometimes saying no is the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for others, because by taking care of your mind, you take care of your ability to keep helping in a meaningful and lasting way. Finally, don't say yes just to avoid conflict. Let's touch on a delicate topic: saying yes just to avoid disagreements. I know what you're thinking. Isn't it easier to agree and avoid a fight? It might seem so at the moment, but trust me, you're not helping anyone. Saying yes just to avoid an uncomfortable conversation might feel like the right thing, but spoiler alert, it's not. In fact, that's an invitation to resentment, burnout, and the feeling that you always end up losing. Here's a hard truth, and it might even be a little controversial. Pleasing people all the time isn't being kind. That's right. If you're always saying yes just to keep the peace, make someone happy, or avoid a fight, you're not being kind. You're being too passive, and that doesn't help anyone, least of all yourself. So stop acting like yes is the magic solution to all problems. Sometimes the most powerful word you can say is no. Let me tell you a story. I used to be the queen of saying yes to avoid conflict, whether it was agreeing to plans I didn't want to make, taking on more work when I was already overloaded, or just going along with others' decisions to avoid awkwardness. I thought I was being flexible, maintaining harmony, but inside I was bursting with frustration. And here's what would happen. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, a little bit of my self-respect disappeared. I would walk away thinking, why did I agree to that? But I convinced myself it was easier than dealing with an argument. Here's the thing. Saying yes to avoid disagreements doesn't solve the conflict. It just pushes it forward. And guess who pays the price? You. You find yourself doing things you don't want to do, spending time where you don't want to be, or taking on responsibilities that aren't even yours, all because you were afraid to say no. It's like signing a frustration contract every time you say yes, just to make someone else happy. And the funny thing is, most of the time, people aren't even that upset when you say no. We create a situation in our heads thinking that saying no will start a fight, that the person will be hurt forever. But that's not what happens. Most of the time, the other person just moves on, finds another solution, and you're left regretting that you agreed to something you didn't want. Sound familiar? Here's the controversial part. It's okay to put your own well-being first, instead of living up to others' expectations. You don't owe anyone a yes just because they asked. Saying yes to avoid a fight might make you feel like you're being kind, but in reality, you're putting yourself in a situation of unnecessary stress. And here's something that almost no one talks about. When you agree to do things you don't want to, you're lying to yourself and to the other person. That's right, it's a lie. Pretending to be okay with something you don't want only hurts you, and it's not fair to others either. Want to know how I changed this behavior? I started practicing what I call polite refusal. Sounds complicated, right? But it's really simple. Instead of saying yes when I didn't want to, I learned to say no kindly. Something like, I'd love to help, but I'm busy right now. Or, that sounds great, but I need to rest this weekend. You'd be surprised at the relief I felt when I started doing this. And guess what? No one was shocked. I didn't lose friends, and I finally felt honest with myself. Here's the key takeaway. Avoiding conflict by saying yes is a temporary fix to a problem that will keep repeating itself. Every time you avoid confrontation, you also avoid growth. You're teaching yourself that your well-being, your desires, and your limits aren't as important as keeping up appearances. But the truth is, a disagreement, when handled with respect, can even strengthen relationships. It shows that you're honest, even in uncomfortable situations, and it helps those around you understand that you have your own priorities too. That doesn't mean you should be rude or start fights. It means you need to be authentic. The next time someone asks you for something and you feel that pit in your stomach, pause and ask yourself, am I saying yes because I want to, or because I'm afraid of their reaction if I say no? If it's the latter, it's time to break the cycle. And remember, no one will condemn you for saying no politely. Saying yes to avoid conflict is like trying to cover up a bigger problem with a temporary fix. It might work for a while, but in the end, the pressure builds and you end up dealing with something much harder later. True kindness, both to others and yourself, requires honesty. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do is say no, set boundaries, and avoid the resentment that comes from agreeing to things that don't feel right. Because the truth is, when you respect your own limits, you teach others to do the same. Now let's talk about the importance of being honest, even when it makes others uncomfortable. Ready? Speaking your truth, even if it makes waves, is essential. That's right. We're taught to sugarcoat things, to always be pleasant, but the truth isn't always sweet. And you know what? That's okay. You're not here to make others comfortable at the expense of ignoring your own integrity. Today, I want to encourage you to speak your truth, even if it shakes things up. Now here's the controversial part. A lot of people think that to be kind, they need to avoid anything that might hurt someone's feelings. But the truth is, sometimes the truth has to be uncomfortable. If you're always holding back what you think just to avoid a little discomfort, you're not being kind, you're being fake. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather face real conflict than live in a fake harmony. I remember a time when I kept quiet just to avoid causing problems. I had a group of friends, and one person would always cross the line with offensive jokes, and everyone would laugh. I'd sit there saying nothing, thinking, this isn't right. But I never spoke up. Why? Because I didn't want to be the annoying one who spoils the fun or points out what's wrong. Until one day I couldn't hold it in anymore. This person made a really offensive joke, and I finally said, that's not funny actually, it's hurtful, and you should stop. The room went silent. In that moment I thought, great, I ruined everything. But to my surprise, the person stopped, apologized, and the group dynamic changed. Things got better once someone had the courage to say what needed to be said. Of course, it was uncomfortable at first, but it was a turning point. The truth can be uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it any less necessary. When you hold back what you feel, you're teaching yourself and others that avoiding discomfort is more important than being truthful. And honestly, that's not the life I want to live. I'd rather have one honest moment of discomfort than years of silence and resentment. You have the right to express your truth. And if people don't like it, that's their problem, not yours. I'm not saying you should go around being harsh or aggressive. There's a way to speak with kindness and respect. But let's be real. Even when you're careful, some people won't like what you have to say, and that's the hard part. We've been taught that if someone feels bad about something we said, it's our fault. But the truth is, discomfort is part of growth. If your truth makes someone uncomfortable, maybe they really need to hear it. And let's be honest. You know when you're holding something back. You know that feeling when something's bothering you, but you just keep quiet to avoid causing trouble? Sometimes things need to be said. If you're always biting your tongue to keep the peace, you're not only being unfair to yourself, you're being unfair to the relationship. Real relationships, whether they're friendships, romantic, or work-related, are built on honesty, and honesty isn't always comfortable. Think about this. When you're always holding back what you think to avoid conflict, you lose a little bit of who you really are. You become a version of yourself that prioritizes what others expect, not what you truly feel, and that can hurt you. Over time, you may start feeling invisible, frustrated, and disconnected from yourself and others. The real you deserves to be seen and heard, even if it causes a little discomfort. Speaking your truth isn't about picking fights. It's about respecting your feelings, boundaries, and beliefs and sharing them clearly. Yes, it may shake things up. Some people might get uncomfortable, and some relationships might change, but that's okay. The ones who truly value you will stay. They'll respect your honesty, and those who can't handle it were probably only around because you were hiding your true self. And you know what? When you start speaking your truth, you realize the discomfort doesn't last as long as the fear of speaking up. Sometimes that awkward moment passes pretty quickly, and the best part? Afterward, you feel a huge sense of relief, like you can finally take a deep breath after holding it in for so long. Believe me, the truth is much lighter than the weight of staying silent. At the end of the day, speaking your truth isn't about making others uncomfortable. It's about being true to yourself. When you do this consistently, even when it's hard, you set yourself free. Free from pretending, free from holding on to resentment, and free from worrying about what others will think. Your truth is your power, and if it shakes things up, that's the price of living authentically. And it's worth every second. Now let's talk about how to say no without having to explain yourself. Get ready for some real talk. You don't owe anyone an explanation when you say no. That's right, you can simply say no and leave it at that. No excuses, no justifications, no long reasons why you can't make it. Sounds radical, right? But trust me, it makes a huge difference. Here comes the controversial part. People might feel uncomfortable because we're so used to thinking we always have to explain our boundaries. But you know what? You don't have to. I remember the first time I tried this. Someone asked me to help them move, something that sounds simple but would have taken up my entire day. I didn't want to do it, but normally I'd have said yes, and then come up with an excuse to back out, or worse, done it grudgingly. But that day I decided to try something new. I just said, "I can't," and stayed quiet. The silence felt awkward, like I needed to come up with an excuse. But guess what? The person didn't ask for one. They just said, "Okay," and moved on. And that's when it hit me. People don't need explanations as much as we think. We've been taught that every no needs to come with a justification, like we need permission from the universe. But the truth is, no is already a complete answer. It stands on its own. If you don't want to do something or don't have the energy, that's enough. You don't need to follow it up with, "I have other plans," or "I'm too busy." None of that. Just say no and leave it at that. I know what you're probably thinking, but people will think I'm rude. Maybe, but here's the truth. People will respect you more in the long run for knowing your own boundaries. By saying no without explaining, you're sending a clear message. I value my time, my energy, and my priorities, and I don't need to justify them to anyone. That's incredibly powerful. Now here's an important point. When you explain too much after saying no, you weaken your position. When you follow up a no with a long explanation, you leave room for negotiation. That allows people to find loopholes in your reasoning. "Oh, you're busy? What about next weekend?" Or, "You don't have money? I'll pay for you this time." And suddenly, your no turns into a maybe. And before you know it, you're doing something you didn't want to do. Let me give you a personal example. When I used to get invited out, instead of simply saying, "No, I don't feel like it today," I'd make up some story about being tired, having work the next day, or needing to save money. And you know what would happen? They'd say, "Oh, it'll only be for an hour. I'll cover your drinks and you can leave early." And guess who ended up going? Me, every time. Why? Because I left room for them to convince me otherwise. Eventually, I got tired of it. I was exhausted from being manipulated into doing things just to avoid seeming rude. So I started saying no and just stayed quiet. At first, it felt weird. People looked at me like they were waiting for an explanation that never came. But you know what happened? It worked. People stopped insisting and accepted my answer because I didn't give them any reason to argue. And the best part? I didn't feel drained anymore from constantly having to justify my choices. And here's the funny part. The more you explain yourself, the more you start to question your own decision to say no. You begin to feel guilty, like you're being selfish, but that's not true. You have every right to say no without needing to explain yourself. Not every decision you make needs to be debated, especially when it involves your time, energy, and well-being. Now, the deeper point, saying no without explaining is about taking back your power. Every time you feel the need to give a reason, you're subtly telling yourself that your boundaries aren't valid unless others approve of them. But your boundaries are valid simply because you set them. You don't need anyone's permission to protect your time, energy, or peace. Think about this. If you say yes to everything because you're scared of what people might think, what does that say about how much you value yourself? Saying no without an explanation sends a clear message, both to others and to yourself. Your needs matter, even if they make others uncomfortable. And the truth is, if someone needs an explanation to accept your no, they probably weren't going to respect it in the first place. So next time someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, try this. No thanks. Period. That's it. You don't owe anyone an explanation or your time. You owe it to yourself to prioritize what's best for you. And sometimes that means saying no without a single excuse. And let me tell you, the feeling of freedom that comes with it is worth every second of discomfort. At the end of the day, your no is just as important as your yes. When you stop feeling obligated to explain your choices, you start living with more confidence and control over your own life. Saying no isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. And remember, you don't need to justify or explain your boundaries to anyone. The only person who needs to understand them is you. So stand firm in your no, stick to your boundaries, and watch how much lighter life feels when you're not constantly explaining yourself. All right, folks, that's it for today. We've covered some important stuff: saying no without guilt, speaking your truth even if it's uncomfortable, and letting go of the need to explain yourself. These are powerful tools, and trust me, when you start practicing them, you'll feel stronger, less stressed, and much more in control of your own life. I know some of these ideas might feel a bit controversial or uncomfortable, but remember, growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It comes when you set boundaries, speak your truth, and realize you don't have to please everyone. Your time, energy, and peace matter. And if this video made you feel a little uneasy, maybe it's time to make some changes in your life. So here's the challenge. Try saying no without explaining yourself at least once this week. It'll feel weird at first, but once you get the hang of it, you'll wonder why you didn't start sooner. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more content like this. We're in this together on this journey of living with boundaries, honesty, and a lot of self-respect. And remember, taking care of yourself isn't cruel. It's being true. See you next time. Stay firm in your boundaries, speak your truth, and never feel guilty for protecting your peace. You've got this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.